So my sermon is on the Old Testament and the New Testament lessons today, and it's about human frailty and God's love. My frailty, your frailty, our frailty. And God's love for me, for you, for all of us together, and for the world. Our frailty and that steady, abiding, persisting love of God that's in our world through time. So these threads of frailty and love, they stretch way back in our scriptures, way back beyond Moses, although that's where we're going to begin today. And then we're going to fast forward to Peter in the New Testament. But the storyline of human frailty and God's love, it's everywhere if you pay attention. If you start to pay attention and start to look for it. So let's begin with Moses. Frailty might not be the first word you think of when you think of Moses. You might think of courage, leadership, direction, strength. Those words might come to mind. After all, he led the Israelites out of Egypt. He demanded their freedom from Pharaoh, who was killing all their male children. Moses led them through the Red Sea, where they wandered 40 years in the wilderness. Frailty isn't exactly the word that comes to mind. But from the very beginning, Moses' life was precarious. From the moment he entered into this world. He was born when Pharaoh, ruler of Egypt, had ordered all the male Hebrew babies to be killed. Pharaoh was worried about the Hebrews, who were growing in number and getting restless. He was worried they'd rise up and turn violent. And so he decided to kill all the newborn male babies. And it's into this violent, fearful, precarious world that Moses was born. After his birth, his mother hid him away, and then at 3 months, she put him in a basket made of papyrus, paper held together with bitumen and tar, and she laid this basket in the reeds, and she left Moses there to God's mercy. It's that basket for me that captures the fragility of it all, the whole human predicament. Hers, Moses's sister who's watching close by, Pharaoh's daughter who will enter into the story, even Pharaoh himself grasping for power. Everything seems to hang on a thread. Well, it just so happened that at the same time Moses' mom was hiding him, Pharaoh's daughter was at the river bathing. And like God later, she hears the cry of a Hebrew child. And she takes a risk. And she asks her maid to go and find him. Moses' sister, who's hiding, comes out of the shadows then. She takes her own risk, and she says that she'll go and find a wet nurse. So Pharaoh's daughter agrees, and so through this very strange, precarious sense of events, Moses is taken care of in the end by his mother, who even earns a wage to do so. So let's stop right here for just a minute. Think about the unlikelihood of it all. Everyone is vulnerable. Everything is frail. But somehow this unlikely group of women come together and were for Moses before he could even be for himself, before God's name's even been mentioned in the story. So Moses grows and becomes strong, and one day he sees an Egyptian beating up a Hebrew, and this stirs him to his core. You see, Moses has this sense of what's right, and really that sense to me seems to go beyond culture. I was really interested in this as I went back and read about Moses, because later Moses steps in to stop a fight from Hebrews, and then those Hebrews go and rat on Moses about his killing an Egyptian earlier, and then Pharaoh wants to kill Moses again, and he's afraid and he runs away. But the point is, Moses seems to step into these situations where he thinks something is not right. So he runs away to Midian, where the Midianites live. So the Midianites were distant ancestors to the Hebrews, so Moses was tenuously connected to them, not exactly strangers. And there in Midian, Moses settles down and he takes a wife, Zipporah, which interestingly, again, came about because Moses had this sense of doing right. He had seen some unruly shepherds harassing Zipporah and her sisters, and out there wandering in Midian, he steps in to intervene. So he settles down with his wife Zipporah in Midian, and he becomes a shepherd. And just when he thinks life's going to get easy, somehow like the ground was firmly under his feet, God calls him, and things get complicated again. He's out shepherding and he wanders beyond the wilderness, and he comes upon a strange sight, this burning bush. And he's curious and he draws near to it. And he hears God calling, Moses, Moses. And he doesn't seem afraid. He says, here I am. God tells him to take off his shoes. It doesn't seem like there's anything particularly precarious or fragile about this. It's scary, really scary, but it's also really clear and really direct. God says to Moses, I've heard the suffering of my people, and I want you to go and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Well, it's clear and direct, and Moses doesn't think he's up for the task. He says to God, after all, we've only just met. I don't even know your name. And how am I ever going to convince the Hebrews, these people enslaved by Pharaoh, to flee? Can't do it, God. But God assures Moses, I will be with you. I will give you what you need. And it's with this assurance, this steady, persistent assurance, and lots of cajoling and encouraging and then persisting along the way, that Moses steps out and begins this journey towards freedom for the Israelites, freedom for himself and his own identity, this pivotal story of his fate and of all of ours. It's this thread of persistent love that pulls Moses forward. So now let's fast forward to Peter, an altogether different person from Moses, I tend to think. We don't really know anything about how Peter entered into the world. By the time we meet him in the gospel, he's a fisherman. And like Moses, he was just going about his business, casting his net one day when he sees Jesus walk by, and Jesus says to him, follow me. I wonder if Peter had any idea what he was getting into when he dropped his nets and followed Jesus. Did he regret this rash decision he made a few days later when Jesus was thronged with people and he found himself in that throng? And Jesus started talking about the poor, the outcast, the dispossessed, the justice seekers. He started talking about all these people on the fringes, all these rabble rousers, and saying that they were specially blessed. Did Peter wonder what he'd gotten himself into, all from his just turning on a dime and saying yes to Jesus? I wonder if he ever wished he were just back in his boat, casting out his net. Well, maybe not. Maybe he didn't, because just a little later, Jesus blesses him. Jesus asked the question, who do people say that I am? And it's Peter. It's Peter who comes right out and answers correctly. He just blurts out, you are the Messiah. Who knows where it came from? It just came out of his mouth. And the next thing he knows, Jesus is heaping accolades on his head. Blessed are you, Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overthrow it. Peter gotten it right, and Jesus praised him. And not only that, but he did it in front of everyone. It's Peter's day in the sun. But this day in the sun is short-lived, because a few days later, Peter gets it dead wrong. He hears Jesus talk about what it actually means that he's the Messiah. And Peter doesn't like it. He can't even stand to hear it. Jesus tells him they're going to Jerusalem, that he'll be mocked and beaten. He'll suffer at the hands of those in power, and then he'll die. And then mysteriously, in some way Peter can't understand, Jesus says he'll rise again. Peter can't stand to hear it for Jesus' sake, but maybe for his own too. And he says, Jesus, this can't be. Peter thinks he knows better than Jesus. And he thinks he can shield Jesus somehow from it all. He's confident. Jesus has no part of this. He says, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block. Satan, the adversary. It's the same word Jesus uses for his tempter in the wilderness. How bitter the sting must have been for Peter. What a fall from grace. To go from heaping accolades, from blessing to adversary. He tried to get out ahead of Jesus. He thought he knew what was best, and then Jesus gives him this smackdown. And yet, the same thing with Peter plays out again with Jesus. It plays out again and again. It's a storyline. Later, you'll remember he denies knowing Jesus 3 times while Jesus' Lord is being beaten. Somehow, Peter's outsized sense of his role, his outsized sense of confidence, crumbles when the reality of life all hits him. There's just this frailty there with Peter. There's this confidence, this incredible confidence, and then this crumbling sense that falls away when reality starts to sort of seep in. And Jesus knows this. But pay attention, because Jesus stands steady with Peter over and over again. He never wavers. In fact, shortly after telling Peter to get behind him, to really taking him down, Jesus invites Peter to go up on the mountain with him, with 2 others, where Jesus is transfigured and named as God's beloved. He invites Peter to come and to be a part of that holy, holy moment. And even on that mountain, Peter finds himself trying to get out in front. He says to Jesus, let's just stay here a while. Kind of nice up here on the mountain. And Jesus, he doesn't smack him down, but Jesus says it's time to go down the mountain. We're going to go down the mountain to Jerusalem. And he beckons Peter again and again to come and follow. Peter's frail, precarious, wavering faith and Jesus' steady, persistent, firm, directing love, pushing them forward, just pushing steadily. So we've got Moses and we've got Peter. Moses, the leader of the Israelites who confronts Pharaoh and leads his people out of slavery, but who keeps coming back to God and saying, why me? I'm not cut out for this. I don't want to do this. It's too hard. I can't speak well. And those Israelites are going to be upset with me. And besides, I only just got to know you. There's Moses sort of pushing back every step of the way. And God just calling forward again and again, step by step, getting irritated every now and again, but pushing forward. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Then Peter, so sure of himself, every time it seems he's the first to try to get out in front of everyone to have the answer. But sometimes he's wrong. He can sometimes walk on water and do it so well, but the next thing you know, he's sinking. With Peter, it's like 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back. But Jesus' steps, they just keep moving forward. He names the missteps and he keeps calling him forward, calling him and all the other disciples forward into his love. Like Moses, like Peter, we want to get things right. Most of us want to believe we're doing the right thing. And we want affirmation from God, from the church, from our friends, from anyone, that what we're doing is right and good and true and joyful. We all want that encouragement and love. We want that affirmation. Of course we do. And it's true, I think, for St. Matthew's as a community too. We want affirmation that we're on the right track, that we're doing the right thing. And it's okay. That's natural. But like Peter and like Moses, sometimes we're wrong, or we just get things wrong, or we can't see the forest for the trees. Sometimes we just miss the mark. We can't see broadly enough. We can't see this vision that God has for the world, and we fall short. Sometimes we don't even know we're wrong. It's these human things like fear or ego or a need to be in control or just our limited ability to see very far. And most importantly, this difficult thing of trusting, resting in some assurance. Sometimes these things get in the way of our seeing the long view, the big picture of God calling us forward. And I honestly don't know how God will reckon that inability of ours, that for any of us, I don't know how God will reckon that in the end, or even for the world. We're all blind in some way, we all miss the mark. But what I do know is that there's this steady, abiding stream of love that keeps pushing us, calling us forward, and pushing us through. And I know that, like with Moses and Peter, part of that pushing us through, part of that journey, and it's a crucial part of it, is the way of the cross. That's suffering and difficulty. It's not an easy journey. We hear in Moses' story that God hears the cries in this world of the suffering. God hears them and God acts. And if we're true to our own calling to Jesus, to the one who suffered on the cross, we'll hear that too. There's really just no way around it. Suffering that is not simply or even mostly our own suffering, although we all have that. It's a suffering bigger than that. It's the suffering of the world, the suffering of just the whole human predicament, of our frailties, of our individual frailties, our community's frailties, the world's frailties. So I take this and I turn to talk about this reconsideration of the Ruffin House, because that's why I think we've decided to enter into this. There is a difficulty and a pain that's a part of our past. It's as deeply a part of our church's history as the stained glass windows in our church. We don't talk about it much because it's uncomfortable, and it makes us vulnerable. It even might make us frail. It may say things about us that we don't want to hear or really pay too much attention to. And it may say to other people, it may say other things about us that we don't even think are accurate or right, that we might not think are fair. But God calls us not to shrink away or even to try to get out in front of it, but to move into it, trusting in God's steady, persistent, abiding love. God calls us to come and follow step by step, trusting in a persisting, encouraging, present kind of love that will lead us through to the promised land, to that great vision of the banquet feast. And we'll get there by and by. St. Matthew's will get there. We keep taking these steps and holding on to that larger vision of beloved community. We'll get there. How will we answer the call in this time right now? Surely precariously, and surely we'll get some things wrong, and surely we'll miss the mark in some way. We may even try to control it or to get out ahead of it and try to make it right or fix it. And Jesus will be there to push us back, to smack us down, maybe even, I hope not, but we'll keep taking step by step. And Jesus too will be there calling us forward into the way of the cross. He'll keep calling us to set our sight on things divine and not things human. and reminding us finally again and again that to really find ourselves, to really, really find who we are as a people, as a community, we may have to lose ourselves. We may just have to try that. To give up on some notions of who we are, or who we've been, or who we even think we've been, in order to find ourselves again. And we will. We will find ourselves again if we're willing to lose ourselves, because God is with us and that abiding, persistent love is there and has been, however fragile, however poorly realized, however broken. God's been there all along and will be there forever. Amen.